Test, test, check 1, 2. You know you need unique New York. You know you need unique New York. Does that sound all right? Ah, that's better. You can always tell something's missing when you get isolated results. Like AI that's only right for one of your systems. Get AI that can work across your data and applications. Learn more at IBM.com. The AI built for business. IBM.
She's made up her mind to live pretty smart. Learn to budget responsibly right from the start. She spends a little less and puts more into savings. Keeps her blood pressure low and credit score raises. She's cutting debt right out of her life. She tracks her cash flow on a spreadsheet at night.
Boring money moves make kind of lame songs, but they sound pretty sweet to your wallet. PNC Bank, brilliantly boring since 1865.
Do you remember when it was surprising to see masked immigration officials detaining people on the street? I do. I remember how when a Turkish graduate student was plucked off the sidewalk in March, the whole masked agents thing was so shocking, we spent a whole news cycle talking about it.
Rumeysa Ozturk had just left her apartment when she's approached by a guy in a dark hoodie and hat who then grabs her hands. You can see.
This is Chris Hayes over on MSNBC.
She is quickly surrounded by half a dozen, I guess, cops, all in street clothes, covering their faces with masks.
There was even this clip of a bystander who filmed the arrest. He questions the agents in real time.
Is covering your faces? You want to take those masks off?
He asks them, "Is this a kidnapping?"
Why are you hiding your faces?
These days, in video after video, a mask almost seems to be part of an ICE agent's uniform.
Yeah, I mean, and, this may just be selective memory, but I feel as though I don't remember seeing many where the officers' faces weren't primarily covered. It'll often be a group of people where most of them or all of them have their faces covered. It is rarely the case where none of them do.
Philip Bump is a columnist over at the Washington Post. He's been writing about the mask thing for a while now.
I will note, and I think this is important context, that the first time I wrote about this was in June 2020 in Washington, D.C., when the first Trump administration deployed a bunch of federal law enforcement officers to respond to the Black Lives Matter protests, and they did the same thing. And so that's part of the reason why what's going on with ICE has resonated so much. I remember when this happened 5 years ago. I remember the response then, and I remember a lot of the same warnings that emerged, which we're now seeing play out.
I remember this moment, too. And it wasn't just the feds. Here in New York, police officers covered up their badge numbers when they patrolled Black Lives Matter protests. That actually prevented them from being found liable for abuses later. Anyway, Phillips says, as the use of masks has become routine in immigration enforcement, there have been other changes, too.
It used to be that most of the people that they were arresting either had criminal convictions or pending criminal charges. I mean, to the point that in January, 90% of those who were stopped by ICE had either criminal convictions or pending criminal charges. Now, the most recent data that we have, 30% of those who are stopped by ICE have no criminal record, have no pending criminal charges. It's been this complete shift. Now that they're sweeping up more people who aren't a threat, this is the time at which they feel as though they're so unburdened that they have to conceal who it is that they are. I talk a lot about the compact that the public has with law enforcement, that we give them the right to detain people, to carry firearms. But in response to that, we expect them to be accountable to us.
Yeah, I was going to say it's called democracy when they're accountable to you.
That's right. And if they refuse to do that, then that compact is broken. And it is not our fault that the compact is broken.
Today on the show, how immigration enforcement went undercover. I'm Mary Harris. You're listening to What Next? Stick around. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy. Just drop in some details about yourself and see if you're eligible to save money when you bundle your home and auto policies. This process only takes minutes, and it could mean hundreds more in your pocket. Visit Progressive.com after this episode to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little there, just hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill, too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
If we're going to talk about ICE officers masking up, it's important to get into what the agency itself has been saying about the practice. Department of Homeland Security officials have claimed that agents are wearing masks because of an increase in assaults, as well as an increase in doxing.
I'm going to answer the mask question.
This is the acting director of ICE, Todd Lyons, a few weeks back at a press conference.
They are wearing those masks because we ran an operation with the Secret Service where we arrested someone that was going online, taking their photos, posting their families, their kids' Instagram, their kids' Facebooks, and targeting them. So let me ask, is that the issue here, that we're just upset about the masks? Or is anyone upset with the fact that ICE officers' families were labeled terrorist?
When I talked to Philip Bump, we were able to map out the way masking has changed over the last few years. As we mentioned in the top, back in 2020, protesters started noticing police officers taking steps to conceal their identities during BLM events. But last year, demonstrators against the war in Gaza started hiding their faces, too. So much so that Columbia University eventually passed a rule that banned most protesters from wearing masks.
Yeah, I mean, these are two forms of masking that revolve around the state. The former, the one that you're referring to, is people who are trying to shield their identities from the state. And the latter is the state trying to shield its identity to ostensibly protect the people who are carrying out enforcement actions. Now, of course, there are a lot of differences between those two, and one can make different value judgments about, which is more or less appropriate. But I think the central change between 2020 and 2025, particularly as it revolves around federal law enforcement, is just the sheer lack of giving a crap that the Trump administration has now relative to 2020.
I mean, you first wrote about Trump 2.0 and masks in May. The headline of your piece was, "Is that guy with a gun an ICE officer or just a guy with a gun?" And what struck me most about that article was you sort of pieced together a variety of stories to kind of give the full picture of what's going on. And one thing you note is that people who object to ICE not, revealing who they are publicly are at risk of then being cracked down on themselves. Like, you talk about a man who put up flyers allegedly identifying ICE agents in Southern California. It's not just that the Department of Homeland Security tried to identify him. They raided his parents' house. They provided aerial footage of the raid to Fox News. They really went all in on this, which it seemed like a lot.
Yeah, that is an understatement. It very much did. They treated it as though this was, a guy who had been caught smuggling guns in the United States. I mean, it really was way over the top. And in real time, it was obviously over the top for this guy putting up flyers saying, here are the ICE officers. What's remarkable about that is that there was no alleged threat. It wasn't that there was, go kill these guys, for example. It was simply, here are ICE officers. And we've seen a lot of efforts, community efforts, grassroots efforts in different places around the United States to be attentive to when ICE is present, right? That there are groups that will track ICE officers, they will follow them, they will let people know, hey, they're heading to the, whatever big box store on X Street, right? Like, we've seen these efforts take place even after that. But I think part of the reason that raid got the level of attention that it did is because ICE was hoping to intimidate people and make them scared to, I don't want to go out and, keep track of what ICE is doing and identify these officers because I don't want them doing that to me or to my parents' house.
The Trump administration noticed when you wrote about masks back in May. Acting ICE Director Todd Lyons wrote a letter to the Washington Post criticizing you. What did he want to say? Like, one of the things he criticized you for was for writing this article on National Police Week, which, okay. But what did he have to say factually about what you were alleging?
Sure. So he made the claim that this was a necessary response to the threats that were being faced by ICE officers. And he elevated a data point, which they had used prior and had used since, suggesting there had been a 413% increase in assaults on ICE officers. And, he pointed to this example, this guy in Texas who had issued threats against ICE as an example of the sorts of threats that ICE officers faced broadly. Ergo, this is why they did it. That was essentially his argument.
And he's since increased that percentage. Now it's 500% increase in assaults on ICE officers. Where are these numbers coming from?
That's a good question. I wrote to them last week twice and said, hey, where are these numbers coming from? I'm on deadline, so on and so forth. They declined to respond. My guess is they declined to respond either because, they're using percentages because the percentage increases from, single digits to low double digits, right? I mean, percentage point increases allow you to mask those sorts of changes.
Right. Like if you have 5 assaults last year and now you have 20 assaults, that's like a 400% increase.
That's exactly right. So we don't know what the numbers are, but I will say this, that I think it is probably true that there has been a substantial increase in assaults on ICE officers, particularly when we consider the standard of what constitutes an assault that they've been using, right? New York City Comptroller Brad Lander was detained last week because he allegedly had assaulted ICE officers, and anyone who saw the video of the encounter can attest to the fact that Lander was not assaulting anyone. This is a ridiculous and specious claim.
Yes, he was simply holding a migrant's hand.
That's right. So ICE has enormously ramped up its activity, right? We've seen a huge increase in what ICE is doing and who they're going after. And it's incredibly contentious. And there are a lot of exchanges with the public that have gotten contentious. And there are a lot more sweeps. And so I think it's very natural. And I don't think it's good. And I don't think assaults should occur, obviously. But I think it's natural that if you are engaging in far more enforcement actions and that those actions are far more contentious, it seems likely there are going to be more scuffles. And if you constitute those scuffles as assaults, then I can see why that percentage would go up. But what's really, really important is that has nothing to do with ICE officers being allegedly doxxed and threatened at home, right? And that's the rationale. So they say there's been this increase in assaults, ergo they need to mask up, but there's no connection between that increase in assaults that has been presented to the public and the need to shield their identities.
Yeah. Did you look into less high-profile cases where ICE says an officer was assaulted, just to kind of understand the lay of the land here?
Yeah, I tried to find either on the Justice Department website or on ICE's website any examples of press releases indicating that there had been charges filed or incidents of assault against ICE officers. I found 12 officers who had been assaulted since the beginning of the year or since January 20th.
That's not a lot.
No, it's not. But I'm sure it's an undercount because I'm sure some people haven't faced criminal charges or that there haven't been press releases about them. But most of what I found was, in fact, all of the examples that I found were assaults against officers who were engaged in efforts to detain people or who were staff members at an existing ICE detention facility. There were, I think, 5 that were just at ICE facilities, which obviously there's no point in masking your identity if you are in charge of detaining people already in a jail.
Can we dig in on the doxing? Because I feel like there's a little bit of a bob and weave going on where the administration will talk about doxing, but then use as evidence the assault number, that percentage, and it feels unclear to me. And there is real evidence that actual people are trying to identify law enforcement officers who are seeking to detain people. Like 404 Media reported this week on a website where users can upload images of Los Angeles police officers. These are not immigration folks, but they could be involved in either policing protest or assisting ICE. So it uses facial recognition software to identify names, badge numbers of officers. Is this a real threat to someone who is trying to, quote unquote, just enforce the law here?
I guess that it depends on how you feel, what you feel constitutes a threat, right? I think one of the things we've seen in recent years is that law enforcement has sort of expanded the definition of what constitutes a threat to law enforcement in a way that includes things which are not immediately physically threatening. Part of the compact that we discussed earlier is that, we offer this power to police officers, and we also offer them certain protections and, salaries and things to justify the fact that they are assuming physical risks on our collective behalf, right? So that was sort of the standard of threat that applied, and I think that has sort of changed. And as such, we may be evaluating these threats on different metrics, right? That I feel as though the public has a right to know who is engaged in law enforcement operations, in part because if something goes wrong, it is important for us to be able to say it was Officer so-and-so who did this, and, then there could be an accountability process, again, as part of that compact. Law enforcement, it seems, feels as though that itself constitutes a threat often, that act of being identifiable can itself be in some way a threat. And I don't think that's fair. And I think that's sort of a shifting of the goalposts in terms of what threat means in that context.
I think my main issue with the Department of Homeland Security pushback about doxing, and that's why they have to mask, is that in my mind, I can call up any number of instances in which, say, a U.S. citizen was arrested and searched accidentally by ICE, and it was a big oops, which they probably haven't apologized for. I can name individual immigrants who I think have been mistreated by ICE, like even sent out of the country, like Kilmar Abrego Garcia. But I cannot call up any examples of individual ICE agents who've been, quote unquote, doxed or harmed. And I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but I do think that this administration is very good at elevating individual examples of harm and making them totemic. Like if you look at, for instance, Laken Riley, the young woman who was killed in Georgia, the GOP really elevated her story and made it an example of like, this is what we can't have happen. And I don't see the counterexample here to the immigrants who are being mistreated.
You're exactly right. If there had been an ICE officer who had been identified and attacked or threatened, or his family had been attacked or threatened, the idea that wouldn't be on Fox News for 4 straight days is laughable, right? So, I mean, obviously, absence of evidence is not evidence of guilt, right? But it does seem striking that for all of this discussion of this increase in assaults against ICE officers, that they weren't even willing, when I emailed them, to just say, yes, here's how many there have been, here's where they have been, this is how bad it is, which seems like a layup, right? They presumably, someone in ICE's communications department knew that I was going to be a little skeptical here. So why not take that opportunity to say, okay, here's why you shouldn't be skeptical, and to present the case. And they didn't do that. And I find it hard to imagine a reason for their not doing that, besides for the fact that they don't have evidence that actually backs up their claim.
After the break, a former ICE official weighs in on the way officers are masking up. This episode is brought to you by Discover. It's smart to always have a few financial goals, and here's a really smart one you can set: earning cash back on what you buy every day. With Discover, you can. Get this. Discover automatically matches all the cash back you've earned at the end of your first year. Seriously, all of it. Discover trusts you to make smart decisions. After all, you listen to this podcast. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
This episode is brought to you by Amazon's Blink Video Doorbell. Get more at your door with the easy-to-install Blink Video Doorbell. Get more connections.
Hey, I'm here for our first date.
More deliveries.
Hi, I have tacos for 2.
Oh, thanks. We'll be right down. And more memories.
Babe, come down. I have a surprise.
All new Blink Video Doorbell with 2-year battery, head-to-toe HD view, and simple setup. Shop now at amazon.com/blink for just $69.99.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Between two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and a VPN, you try to be in control of how your info is protected. But many other places also have it, and they might not be as careful. That's why LifeLock monitors hundreds of millions of data points a second for threats. If your identity is stolen, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit lifelock.com/podcast for 40% off. Terms apply.
After getting off the line with Philip, I wanted an insider's perspective on what immigration officials might be thinking when they pull on a mask. So I called up Scott Shuchart. From 2010 to 2018, Scott worked on immigration policy within the Department of Homeland Security Office of Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. He ended up resigning over Trump's family separation policy during Trump's first term. But then Scott returned to ICE as a political appointee in 2022. He was the head of ICE's policy office for part of that second stint. Scott has been watching as agents not just mask up, but carry out immigration operations in plain clothes, T-shirts, jeans. It concerns him. When he was still at DHS, he was often the guy making sure that officers complied with federal regulations. So I asked, are there even rules about what officers should be wearing?
There are some general standards. Unfortunately, as far as I know, none of it is public with respect to professional presentation. Various operations will prescribe whether people are wearing protective gear, whether they're wearing bulletproof vests or not. There's also some litigation around this, including a settlement that the current administration's trying to finalize in Southern California that has limited ICE's ability to do things like wear a windbreaker that just says police on it. There's a judge in California who found that it was an improper misrepresentation for ICE officers to hold themselves out as police when they're ICE. So there are various requirements like that, but there is not a set uniform.
That's so interesting because if I saw ICE agents with a police jacket, I guess I'd feel reassured at this point. I often see pictures of ICE agents just in like jeans and a T-shirt and a mask.
I agree with that. The specific issue with the windbreakers was that ICE was engaging in various ruses to get people to open the door. They would hold up a picture of just a random person and say, oh, we're looking for this person. We're the police. Can you open the door so we can come in and talk to you about it? And then because they wouldn't have had an arrest warrant, once they're through the door, they can execute an administrative arrest. So the court was concerned about that, not the uniform issue specifically. I agree that the way that officers executing civil immigration enforcement activities, and I should say they're not all from ICE. This administration has brought in people from a lot of other agencies to work on that. It seems to create a lot of risk of misunderstanding of whether somebody is legitimately a law enforcement officer or not. Now, there is a law that when uniformed officers are responding to a civil disturbance, they need a visible name tag or badge number. But so far as I can tell, ICE is treating these officers when they're not as a part of a uniformed response team as exempt from that.
Do you still have colleagues inside the Department of Homeland Security? Because I'm a little bit wondering what the conversation is like internally about how over the last few months, suddenly the presentation of what a Homeland Security officer might be has changed.
I will say that many of the people that I work with have been fired through these, I think, illegal reductions in force. But I have talked to some people who are still on the inside. And my sense is that the way that ICE leadership has defended the way some officers were wearing face coverings has been understood as a kind of direction to do so. And so I'm not sure everybody's gung-ho about it. I'm sure that there are people who have various kinds of apprehensions, whether it's for individual safety or for the kinds of atmospherics that we've been talking about. But I think that there is a perception that this is the direction that they are supposed to go.
What's your biggest worry about the fact that so many agents at this point are concealing their identities, refusing to say who they are when they detain people?
I'm worried that somebody's going to start shooting at them, and it's going to get very ugly. This is a country where, in general, if you walk up to somebody's front door in a T-shirt and a mask, they might shoot you back. And I am kind of amazed that we haven't seen worse incidents so far, but it just seems extremely volatile and genuinely dangerous to people. On the specific issue of not identifying themselves after they've made an arrest, that is clearly out of regulation. I know it's happening. It's on the video from the Ozturk case, the graduate student at Tufts who was arrested, where that was recorded. The law is very clear that even if they are in plain clothes, even if they are covert up until they put their hands on somebody, once somebody's in handcuffs, they have to say why the person is under arrest and who they're with, who's arresting them. And I would hope that that is a problem that a little bit of training and intervention is going to improve. But the larger issue of masses of people operating in communities without uniforms, without individual name tags, I really think it's a risk of explosive violence. And I hope it doesn't happen, but I don't kind of understand how it doesn't at this rate.
When you hear leaders at ICE or the Department of Homeland Security justifying the use of masks and concealed identities when they're apprehending people who have maybe overstayed a visa, something like that, I wonder what you make of what they say. What I hear them saying, and this is people like Tom Homan, for instance, the border czar, quote unquote. I hear him saying things like there's been a rise in assaults and also a rise in, quote unquote, doxing, like people identifying officers and trying to make their locations, their family information public. What do you make of that as a reason for why people are maybe concealing their identities here?
I am not in a position to say that there is nothing to that. And I am willing to believe that there are particular cases and particular threats, things like doxing, that create real concern. But to go back to what we were saying earlier, you don't have to think that there is zero risk to officers from being out doing their job in public, identified, to think that that risk needs to be balanced against the broader risks of the loss of trust in federal law enforcement, the loss of a mutual perception of humanity between people who are facing off in a potentially violent encounter. And I think whether it's a mask on a protester or a mask on an officer, I think there's a concern that people have a harder time seeing someone as a full human being when they don't see their face. I just am concerned that those claims about officer safety are being used as a kind of trump card rather than as a piece of a reasonable balance.
If you were still at the Office of Civil Rights or if it was still operational, would this masking be something you would be investigating or receiving complaints about?
Oh, I'm sure both. Yes. I think there is a constitutional dimension, even though there's not a lot of law on this, to being able to identify individual officers to seek redress. It certainly was a constant issue in doing that work when people interacted even with a corrections officer inside a facility, and they're certainly not wearing masks, to make sure that people have clear names so that you can identify, who was on shift at the particular time that the thing happened. So I am confident that we would have been looking into it extensively. And my guess is there are dozens of complaints on file right now that nobody's doing anything about.
I know the Civil Rights Office is closed, but is there a pathway to accountability here for any of what's happening now with officers, not identifying themselves, masking? If you're someone who has a real problem with that, someone who's been detained, is there something you can do?
Right. There may be individual causes of action in particular cases. Certainly if there was an excessive use of force in an arrest or something, individual lawyers might bring those cases. There is an inspector general's office that has not been shut down at DHS, and it should be investigating, again, things like use of force. But broadly speaking, I think Congress is the best place to really get some intervention here. I don't know if it's going to happen before the midterms, but this is the kind of thing that calls for political accountability.
Scott, I'm really grateful for your time. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Scott Shuchart is a former assistant director for regulatory affairs at Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Earlier in the show, I spoke with Philip Bump, a columnist for The Washington Post. And that's our show. What Next is produced by Paige Osburn, Elena Schwartz, Rob Gunther, Anna Phillips, Ethan Oberman, and Madeline Ducharme. Ben Richmond is the Senior Director of Podcast Operations here at Slate. And I'm Mary Harris. Go track me down on Blue Sky. I'm at Mary Harris. Thanks for listening. Catch you back here next time.